The development context of Nioh 3 gives me a very clear feeling. Team Ninja decided to use the gap between games to allow themselves to tinker with structural things and not just refine combat and loot like they did from 1 to 2. In interviews, they frame this longer interval as part of seeking a better experience and keeping up with the evolution of what the public expects from a modern action RPG. And this speaks directly to the more experimental vibe the demo gives off. For me, the most expensive and risky decision is this shift toward a more open design. You can feel it's not an open world just for the sake of trends, but rather a consequence of the studio having gone through Rise of the Ronin and learned how to build larger fields and then bringing that know-how into the Nioh universe. Playing the demo, I'm torn. I love the idea of having more breathing room to explore and approach encounters in different ways, but at the same time, I fear the game might lose that handcrafted level pacing with its well-calibrated tension and rewards. It also strikes me how the project seems to have been born from an internal desire within the team and not just a decision from above to churn out another chapter. According to what has been released in interviews, Nioh 3 was proposed within the team with a central concept that remained stable, which would even explain how they managed to drop a demo alongside the announcement like, "This has been standing for a while." As a player, this gives me a bit more confidence that there is a vision, not just a checklist of features. At the same time, development seems to have been somewhat elastic in phases. There's talk that the idea started early, but actual production geared up later, with personnel changes and a more official start further down the line. This type of story is normal in large studios juggling multiple projects, but in practice, I read this as some parts might be super mature, combat, weapon feel, and others still in fine-tuning, AI, exploration flow, difficulty balancing in open areas. The demo, at least, has that scent of, this is promising, but it's still going to take some hammering. I felt Team Ninja trying to raise the skill ceiling again, only now through new paths. There are published impressions highlighting changes like more mobility and tweaks that make the experience quite different from the previous ones, and this matches my reading. It doesn't look like Nioh 2.5, it looks like a game trying to justify the number 3. I like this because Nioh has always been about depth, but depth is only good when the game teaches you without humiliating you for free. On the real-life side of development, the official communication about the demo itself reinforces how much they are using this period to collect feedback and polish. Demo on PC and PS5, co-op, save carryover to the final game, short window, and completion bonuses. To me, this is a very pragmatic strategy. Put people to test performance, progression, and the combat loop on a large scale and still create an incentive for the community to actually finish the content and generate useful data. And that's where what I find most interesting in this whole context comes in. Nioh 3 seems to be trying to balance two promises at the same time. We will evolve, and we will continue being Nioh. The studio itself talks about building on the foundation of previous games, and this is exactly what I want to see fulfilled at launch. The game can change the map, mobility, and structure, but it cannot lose that identity of technical combat plus build crafting that makes you think, okay, this is Team Ninja. The story seems to work exactly like the previous games did. It exists to provide epic context for the yokai massacre, not to be the reason you keep playing. The setup is direct. You are Tokugawa Takechiyo, grandson of Ieyasu, almost becoming shogun in 1622, and then your younger brother, Kunimatsu, gets pissy, accepts power from a dark force, and unleashes a yokai invasion on Edo Castle. To save Japan, and probably your own skin, you use the power of your guardian spirit Kusanagi and start traveling through time to change destiny. I confess the idea of time travel makes me a bit wary. It's an old narrative crutch that in the wrong hands, becomes a lazy excuse to throw together historical characters from totally different eras without any coherence. But at the same time, Nioh has always been kind of anything goes with history. William Adams fighting Kelly with a yokai dragon spirit was already surreal, so traveling through the Sengoku, Heian, and Bakumatsu eras to meet Minamoto no Yoshitsune and Takasugi, Shinsaku doesn't really break the seriousness the series never truly had. What interests me more is the dynamic between the brothers. Kunimatsu falling into darkness out of envy and hate is cliche as hell, but it works well for an action game that needs a personal antagonist, not just a generic big bad. I don't know if Team Ninja will develop this properly or if it will just be he's evil because he is, but at least it has potential to generate emotional weight in some confrontations, as long as they don't throw it all aside and focus only on a random giant yokai as the final villain. Another thing that catches my attention is the cast of historical characters that will appear. Himiko, Hattori Hanzo, Honda Tadakatsu, Yagyu Munenori. It's a mix of classic names from the series with new people. Saito Fuku appearing as a wet nurse, and Onmyo Mentor is cool because it connects with Nioh 2 and gives a sense of continuity to the universe. But I worry about it becoming a cameo parade without depth. Look, this is famous so-and-so. Now fight against him or with him for 5 minutes and bye. The demo itself doesn't deliver much narrative. It's basically go there, explore, kill yokai, enter the crucible, and defeat the boss. There are some NPCs scattered around, but nothing that makes you feel the story is truly progressing. I understand it's a demo, but it leaves me wondering if the full game will have that narrative rhythm of mission then cutscene then mission again, or if it will be looser, open world style where you pick up quests and the story advances when you want. Honestly, I don't want to play Nioh 3 for the story. I want to play to feel the combat, test builds, die 50 times to the same boss, and finally learn their moveset. The story is the seasoning, not the main course. But I appreciate when the seasoning is done right. If Team Ninja can give Takechio a decent arc, show Kunimatsu's fall in a believable way, and use time travel to create interesting parallels between eras, then I'll engage. If it's just an excuse to justify varied level design, it will be forgettable, like the first game's story was for many people. My expectation with Nioh 3's narrative is that it doesn't get in the way, that the cutscenes aren't too long, that the dialogues have dramatic weight when needed, and that the story gives a credible reason for me to be traversing eras killing Oni and dragons. If it achieves that and still surprises with a good twist or a real emotional moment, then I consider it a bonus. But if the story is weak and the combat is excellent, I'll forget the story in a week and probably won't care. The gameplay, from what I felt playing the demo and what Team Ninja has been showing, looks like a very conscious attempt to open up the formula without losing that nervous and technical combat that makes Nioh. The promise of instantly switching between samurai and ninja in the middle of a brawl already changes the way I think about every encounter, because it's not just swapping weapons, it's swapping game logic. In practice, the biggest turning point for me is this open field approach, a more open field to explore instead of just super linear missions. In the demo, this gives a sense of a more continuous adventure. You walk, find a problem, resolve it, find a shortcut, and create a route that is yours, and not just following a corridor. At the same time, I can see the risk of it becoming a checklist if they abuse repetitive activities, because this type of structure can get tiring fast if the content doesn't vary. The core is still combat, and this is where I was most divided in a positive way. The samurai style gives me that safety of, okay, this is Nioh, that weight of animation, reading, punishment, and rhythm management that the series has always done very well. The ninja style, from what has been disclosed, is a faster and more evasive approach, focusing on aerials and ranged attacks, and this gives a much more aggressive and mobile face to the fight. The detail that moves me the most is how the ninja seems to break some classic crutches of the series. Instead of key pulse, it has this mist, which the description itself treats as a mobility resource, a clone to distract and reposition. This is the kind of thing that in a demo might sound OP or weird at first, but when it clicks, it becomes the game's signature, and I felt exactly that potential of being something that changes the meta of the fight without just becoming a gimmick. Another thing that, honestly, I liked more than I expected is the quality of life package the demo gave me with features like double jump, crouching, more realistic stealth, freer fast travel, and waypoints. This gives more options to start, combat your way, arrive from above, isolate an enemy, avoid a patrol, and Nioh has always been excellent when it gives you tools to create an advantage before the chaos. If the level design keeps up with this freedom, it could be one of the most visible leaps for the franchise. In terms of general feeling, Nioh 3 gave me a vibe of Team Ninja gathering recent learnings, especially in this mix of parry, deflect, and more modern mobility that many people comment reminds them of influences from other studio games. I won't claim that this will balance perfectly. A demo is a demo, and balancing usually changes, but the direction seems to be more approach options without giving up difficulty and intensity. If I were to summarize my opinion as someone who only had a taste of the demo, Nioh 3 looks like a game that could become addictive due to the creativity of switching styles and the more open exploration. But it will depend heavily on content variety and the balance between samurai and ninja, so it doesn't become one style is clearly better. The foundation is strong, and Team Ninja itself is selling the idea of intense open field exploration plus fluid style switching as the big differentiator now. The challenge is to make this sustain itself for dozens of hours with enemies, objectives, and builds that continue to surprise. Graphically, the demo gave me the sensation of a game that doesn't want to sell you the prettiest of the generation, but rather a functional visual that sustains the speed and readability of combat. Team Ninja also seems quite confident in this direction because the official material keeps hitting the key of intensity and fluidity more so than photorealism. What I liked most was the art direction. Yokai, armor, particles, and the dark identity of the period work. And even when the scenery isn't wow, it still has personality. In some sections, you can feel they are betting on contrast and atmosphere, fog, sharp lighting, darker ambiance to build the mood. Now, being very honest, in several moments I felt the world was a little washed out, with less vibrant colors than I expected. I saw people commenting exactly this, that it lacks saturation and lighting seems a bit irregular, and I understand where this impression comes from because in open areas, the scene sometimes seems to lack that punch. The most delicate point for me is legibility during the fight. When particles and sparkles enter the scene, the screen can get polluted. I wouldn't say it ruins the combat, but there were times when I wanted a little less glow to see the weapon, the timing, and the body of the animation better. On the flip side, the character models, armor, and main enemies hold up well in close-ups, which is where Nioh really lives. You are always glued to the target, reading stance, hitbox, and impact. The visuals don't need to be ultra detailed if the silhouette and animation are clear, and the impression I got is that the game prioritizes this, which matches the high stakes battle proposal the studio highlights. If I had to nail down an opinion today, the graphics of Nioh 3, at least in the demo, please me more for their identity and function than for the spectacle, but they still seem to need polishing in lighting, sharpness, and effects control. My impression is that the demo is still at that promising but irregular point. You can feel the potential of the combat, but performance oscillates precisely when the game demands more precision. In a game that lives on timing, these hiccups and occasional drops end up drawing more attention than in other genres. In my playthrough, what struck me most was the contrast between fluidity and clarity. The mode that prioritizes FPS manages a more playable experience, but the image can get blurry when the action gets loaded with effects. I understand the choice. I prefer frames, but there are moments when reading what is happening in the middle of the chaos gets worse than it should be. I felt some micro stutters and specific drops in certain areas, not necessarily broken performance all the time or anything that disrupts the experience too much. On PC, the demo already comes with several modern crutches and options, like upscaling and even frame generation via FSR 3 inches, some tests, and you can aim for 60 frames per second, but with drops in heavier areas if you insist on high quality. And that brings me to my however. In a technical action game, frame generation might be okay, but I'm always wary because of latency and consistency, even when people say it was minimally acceptable. What I expect, and this is where what the developer usually does comes in, is fine-tuning until launch. Improving stability in performance mode, and cleaning up the worst stutters, even if that means accepting a more aggressive dynamic resolution in critical moments. As it stands, I would play prioritizing frames without thinking twice. But I wouldn't call it smooth, yet it's more like bearable, but you can feel it's a demo. For me, Nioh 3 is worth buying at launch only if you came out of the demo with that feeling of, okay, I accept some technical rough edges because I want to master this combat right now. Team Ninja is selling this idea of switching between samurai and ninja in real time, and this, in practice, changes the rhythm so much that it makes you want to start early and start conditioning your brain to this flow. If you are more sensitive to performance, I tend to recommend waiting, not because I think the game will arrive bad, but because the demo already made it clear, at least for me, and from what many people commented, that there are still moments with drops and micro stutters. And in Nioh, this weighs much more than in a common action game because the game demands precision and clean reading. So waiting for 2 or 3 post-launch updates might be the best sanity investment. The point that excites me to buy early is that the combat seems to have a new identity without abandoning the series' DNA. The deflect that, perfect timing defense, rewarding aggression and filling meters, and the game encouraging you to switch styles as part of the kit, not as an optional mode. In the demo, I felt that when everything clicks, it becomes that type of game where you think about it at work, come home, and want to try just one more run to do better. The game is indicated for those who like technical action games, learning systems, and being rewarded for execution, the type of player who enjoys experimenting with weapons, building characters, and deriving pleasure from understanding the why of having died. It is also for those who like to explore a more open map, but still with level structure, with alternative paths, strong optional enemies, and hidden areas, because this was highlighted in official previews as part of the open field. I would not indicate or would recommend entering with caution for those who want a simpler and linear experience, who get frustrated with repetition and trial and error, or who already know they get irritated with a game that at launch is still under adjustment. And also for those who hate when the game throws a lot of information on the screen and requires adaptation, Team Ninja even mentioned changes to make notifications less distracting and improve tutorials, which suggests that this was a real friction point for part of the audience. Honestly, I think I will buy it, but I don't see myself as a day one hostage. If I feel the same instability I felt in the demo in more chaotic moments, I'll stop, let the game mature with patches, and come back when performance is more consistent, because I want to love Nioh 3 for the combat, not sugarcoat it while it stumbles on the part that matters most.
かたじけない。それがしは徳川家臣本田忠勝。貴殿見ぬ顔だが、どこの手のものだ。
徳 徳川名は竹千代。